The single greatest success of privatization was something that happened a long time ago. When Ukraine first became independent, the very first thing that they did in terms of privatization was what they called mass privatization of residential properties. So, because, on independence, everybody, whether you are a member of the Rada, whether you're a farm worker, it doesn't matter, rich, poor, doesn't matter. Everybody was living in an apartment or they had a dacha or they're living in a house that they did not own. Now, they had maybe been living there for 3 generations sometimes, but they didn't own it. It was owned by the government. So the government went through a process of mass privatization so that every legally registered occupant of a property, not land, of a property, was able to take ownership of that for free. There were some administrative fees, which there always are to do stuff, but nobody had to buy it. They didn't put a market value on a flat and make you buy it. They just gave it to you if you were the legally registered occupant. Now, that was so fundamentally successful because for many years in Ukraine, all the way until the last maybe 5 years or so, for many years in Ukraine, there was a fear, a legitimate fear, that, certain political parties like the Communist Party under Mr. Simonenko, they will take power and we're going to go back to communism. Politically, we're going to go back to a pure administrative economy. Well, no, you're not. Because it's a little hard to go back to communism when everybody in Ukraine, including a lot of very powerful people in Ukraine, own their own residential property. They have a home. You can't kick them out of their home. One of the best ways that authoritarian states can control people is to say, well, you have to think what I want you to think and you have to do what I want you to do, or otherwise you'll lose your job and you can't live in that apartment anymore because I own it, you don't. So once that foundation was put into place, that's the foundation upon which Ukraine has been slowly, steadily, with fits and starts, building a market economy and building democracy. But it ultimately, started with that great success of giving people ownership of a place to live. The greatest failure is right now the Zaporizhia Aluminum Industrial Complex, because this was an enterprise, an extremely large enterprise, employed 6,000 people, very important to the local economy of Zaporizhia. 6,000 workers could represent, let's just use round numbers, that could represent the income of 25,000 people, say, throwing in family members. And of course, there's a big economic multiplier there for small businesses and et cetera, and et cetera, et cetera. That aluminum complex was very profitable. It was producing, we've actually valued that complex on 2 different occasions. Most recently, we valued it just like now for privatization. But it was operating for a few years recently, 2008, 9, 10. It was operating to close to full capacity. And it was very profitable. And today it is completely dead. Well, it's kind of a long, complicated story, but it is completely dead. And instead of an aluminum complex that could be sold for, I'm not going to use actual numbers, it could be sold for a very large price. Think of aluminum complexes, right? But instead of being an enterprise that could be sold for a very large price, it is an enterprise that can be sold only for a very small amount of money. and it will never produce aluminum again. It only employs today about 200 people. The vast majority of the industrial capacity, industrial assets, will be simply liquidated, and that obviously is not good for anybody. Not the national government, not the municipal oblast government of Zaporizhia, not for people who like to have jobs. So that's a big failure, and it's a failure of primarily politics. It's primarily a political failure, not an economic failure.